Okay, hi everyone that is currently logged in and waiting for us to begin. We're just going to give maybe another minute or two for people to join us, and then we'll get started. Okay, Eli, did you want to start us off with the logistics of the webinar?
For sure.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, hi everyone. On the webinar, just before we get started, I'm just going to start off with a couple housekeeping things. First off, just for everyone's knowledge, in order to provide safe and secure virtual spaces, we're taking some measures to mitigate the risk of Zoom hacking in our webinars. So all our hosted webinars require the password that's provided on the invite. I've also kind of manually approved everyone on the attendee list. And by default, participants are view only, but if there's questions that people have, please feel free during the webinar, especially during the presentations, to click the raise hand button, and then we can unmute you to ask a question in person. Or if you'd rather, there's a question and answer function that you can type in your question and either choose to ask anonymously or not. And then at the end, we're going to open up to a larger group discussion. And for that, everyone will be unmuted and able to ask questions as they wish. After this webinar, I'm going to send out a very short survey, and it'd be really great if everyone could please fill that out and send it back. It's really important feedback for us to make sure that these webinars are the best they can possibly be. And just one final disclaimer is that the webinar is being recorded, so we can post it up for people to see that can't make it today. All right, off to you, Marley. Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, I was muted. I'd like to turn it over to Ira Provost from Pagani First Nation now, who will start us off with a prayer.
Okay, okay, nagsukuha nistuago kapikani koni idamks kanatani kitkanets matsnoch bawal. Good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here this morning in this virtual space. I'm looking at the attendees here, and I wish we can all be sitting in person. There's so many familiar faces there that familiar names. There's no faces there, but I'm going to give an opening prayer this morning, and I want to call us all together in a good way. I'm going to begin in Blackfoot, and then I'll say the remainder of the prayer in English, so everyone understands what it is. But fundamentally, just before I start, I want everyone to take this time to ground themselves and to as they I have my way, you have yours, and I want you to honor your beliefs and your values in the way you pray, or the way you reflect on the good things in life. And so with that, I'll begin, and wish everyone certainly a really good day today. Participatory. It's Maspumganan Tisagoi. Gimoganan Estmatsokanan Sagapi, Knapi, Makamatapi. Ayo Gimatu Kanan. Ayo Spumsananix, Nasistananix, Nasnanix. Okay, it's Badabi Spumsana, Eats Spumsa. Moto Geets Kanatsamita Kakweeks Bumsananevskaks. Creator, we come to you today. We ask for your strength, your wisdom to be with us, the work that we do in communities, and we pray for the communities in which we work. The work and the decisions and the business that we do throughout the day benefit our communities and reflect back on our communities in a good way. We pray for our road ahead in the journey with program that is underway here, and we pray for the outcomes to benefit our community, and again in a good way. And we pray for those of us in our communities who need prayers and special attention. We pray for the sickness of the COVID to not impact our communities harshly. We pray for those who are sick. We pray for those who are in need of attention, who go without. And we pray for their safety and their security. And we pray for ourselves. I pray that we remain strong and that we remain healthy in the days to come, and that the roads that we travel on, when we do travel, are safe and we return home safe. Kamatama Samibata and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ira, for that beautiful blessing and for starting us off in a good way today. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Marley Kozak, and I am your host for today's webinar. I'm a community-based monitoring program coordinator. Sorry, I thought I was on mute for a second again. I am a community-based monitoring program coordinator with the government of Alberta, and I'm joining you today from Treaty 6 and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4 in Edmonton, Alberta. So today's webinar is part of a larger monthly webinar series titled Keeping the Fire Burning. And these monthly webinars are a platform for knowledge sharing and learning under an initiative that I'm involved in called Fire with Fire. Fire with Fire is a multi-year collaboration between the Resilience Institute based out of Canmore, Alberta, the Resource Stewardship Division of Alberta Environment and Parks, and 4 Indigenous communities across Alberta. So we're currently working with Kainai First Nation, Pagani First Nation, Samson Cree Nation, and Dene Jaw Nation. Fire with Fire, so the goal of Fire with Fire is working towards bringing together Indigenous and scientific understandings and knowledge of changing fire regimes, which will lead to new insights and innovative practices to enhance local, regional, and provincial climate change resilience. So there's 2 sort of main areas of work that we're doing to achieve this goal. The first one is knowledge sharing, and so some of that work includes these webinars that we're doing each month, and then community capacity building through participatory video training. So participatory video offers a way for communities to be directly involved in sharing and shaping their own stories by having a lead role in creating their own films. The process of participatory video, it brings people together to explore issues, be creative, and share in their own voice what they feel is important and communicate this to others through the medium of film. So today's webinar, Ethical Considerations and Guidance for Participatory Video Practice, is going to focus on participatory video. Today is really an invitation to learn and share about the responsibilities, values, and rights that surface in participatory video practice with Indigenous communities. Our speakers will highlight relevant ethical guidance, explore practical examples of ethical considerations in participatory video, and offer suggestions, ideas, and resources for how to be aware of and respectfully address the issues that may arise while performing participatory video. So with that, I would like to introduce our 2 fantastic speakers for today, Ira Provost, who started us off with the beautiful prayer, and Kelly Bannister. Ira is from the Pagani Nation, a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Ira has a master's degree in Indigenous Studies from the University of Lethbridge and is an active member in his Blackfoot Societies and Protocol. Kelly Bannister is an ethnobiologist and biocultural ethicist from British Columbia who focuses on intercultural relationships involving biodiversity, Indigenous knowledge, and cultural heritage. She has a PhD in ethnobotany from the University of British Columbia and has been involved in ethics policy and education for over 20 years. So with that, I would like to pass it over to both of our speakers to take us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marley. I want to thank Ira first, raise my hands for your opening words and your beautiful prayer, that prayer of caring and concern for all of our well-being across all the lands and across the waters that keep us apart during these COVID times. And I also share that desire that we could be in person, but I am grateful we can be here in this virtual space. So thank you, Ira, for the opening, and thank you, Eli and Marley, for hosting and for the introduction. I also thank Ira for co-presenting with me and standing together for many months now in this ethics work that we're going to be sharing today. And I'd like to start by, I'm going to share my screen. And we'll hope this works. And I'm going to start us off with a little overview, but I'd like to let you know that I'm participating from Coast Salish territory, specifically Thetis Island, which is unceded territory at the Penelakut tribe. And Penelakut people, for the most part, live on a neighboring island called Penelakut Island, and we are on the southwest coast of British Columbia. And I think the best description of me is that I'm an island girl, born and raised, and I hope I will live out my entire life as an island girl. It's just really the central part of who I am. And I wanted to share with you one of my favorite views from Thetis Island, the banks of Thetis Island overlooking the harbor towards Penelakut Island, where I live. And I've been working, I think as Marley may have said, I've been working in the area of ethics, biocultural ethics, intercultural ethics for over 20 years now, although not on purpose, I would say, because I'm trained as a natural and social scientist. But more my interest in ethics and my maybe commitment to ethics has arisen out of, in response to my lived experience as a scientist, working with Indigenous communities in BC and elsewhere. And really, it's because I became aware of how Western scientific research methods and philosophies can sometimes cause unintended harms and offenses to Indigenous communities in many ways, particularly in the ways of misunderstanding and misusing Indigenous knowledge and working across knowledge systems without that competence or understanding of where we're going wrong. So I've been committed for a long time to this question of how can we work better together across our different worldviews and across our different values and knowledge systems. And this has led me to a lifelong interest in ethics, not necessarily as a set of kind of rules to follow or a checklist, which is often kind of how people think about ethics. But for me, ethics is really an invitation to examine how we treat one another, how we relate to one another and the natural world, and how can we do these things more kindly, with more care, more respectfully. So, just with my presentation as sharing not just my thoughts and ideas and experience, but some collective work of a group of mentors and colleagues that I've been walking with, including Ira. We've been walking together for many months to develop some new ethical guidance for sharing and co-creating or co-producing knowledge. And Ira is a very important part of this work, as are, I'm just gonna acknowledge my mentors and colleagues, Vicky Kelly and Elmer Ghostkeeper, Danica Littlechild, Glebra Gorodetsky, Florence James, Karen Smith-Vargy and Norma Cassie. And I'm sure as we go along and continue this work, there'll be many others who join us as well. And what I would like to do, and what we decided, Ira and I decided, is I would try to do a brief, a big picture about this ethical guidance work that we've been working on, and then pass over to Ira to speak more from his perspective and experience and his teachings. And we're hoping that this background that we provide collectively will inform a conversation that will be helpful to you in your own work about some of the ethical considerations and responsibilities in doing community-based research and participatory video, so that that can hopefully support your work going forward in a good way. So before I speak to the ethical guidance itself, I want to acknowledge with great appreciation and respect some of the key influences and contributions that have informed this work. And one is that the work is really founded and inspired by a set of 6 principles that were developed by the Alberta's Indigenous Wisdom Advisory Panel for guiding their own work in advising on Alberta's science program. And we've had the benefit, our advisory and stewardship circle has had the benefit of not just reading the work and being informed of these principles by reading them, but we've had the chance to be in conversation and receive the advice and the support of many members of the Indigenous Wisdom Advisory Panel, which we're very grateful for. And one of the, these are the guiding principles of their work: good faith, sharing, mutual respect and honor, kindness, generosity and trust, and humility and the trickster. One of my favorites, because the trickster always seems to pop up in every webinar that I'm involved in ethics. So I'm just sort of wondering when that might happen. And that's welcome, because that's life. So one of the key teachings that we really received was that these principles are expressed and articulated, but they're not a linear sequence of how to do things. They're meant to be held as these hands are holding them. They're meant to be held all together. They're interrelated in this non-hierarchical way. They're meant to be held and implemented and enacted as a whole. So we've really kept that idea in our own ethical guidance development. It's very important. Another piece of our work is that, as with the 6 IWAP principles, we place in the center of these principles this awareness of all the relationships in our lives, whether family, community, to the land, creator. So all kinds of relationships, all our relations, as one might say, at the center. And also this idea of ethical space, that our work is about creating and enacting something that's known as ethical space. And I just want to share a little bit about ethical space. Has been an idea that has really influenced me a lot for many years. And I first learned of this idea from a Cree educator and scholar named Willie Ermine, who I had the privilege to sit on some committees with in earlier years, and then he's been an inspiration ever since. But this idea of ethical space that Willie brought forward into the realm of research ethics was this idea of that there's this possibility based on our ability to interrelate, the space of possibility between our worldviews, and it's created because we're different, because of our differences, that we don't have to be the same in order to interrelate, but we can step out of our own way of thinking for a moment to be with each other in a new space of possibilities, while we still respect one another's views and embrace our diversity and embrace that complementarity that can come from combining, what I know and what you know, what I believe and what you believe, forward between and because of the differences and the shared goals that we have. So ethical space offers this opportunity for deepening our understanding of what ethics are and how to relate to one another across our different worldviews and cultures. And as Willie describes ethical space, It's not meant to be a noun. It's not a physical space. And you might even say it's not even a metaphorical space. Ethical space is more action oriented, like a stepping into being together and acting in new ways together. And I recall with a lot of appreciation and vividness, really was giving a keynote lecture at a conference that I organized on Indigenous research ethics back in 2015. And he said with some kind of like discouragement, I remember him saying, we're talking about ethical space as an it, and what do we do with it? And he says, ethical space is not an it. Ethical space is not what we do with it, it's what we do together. So that really struck me, and I try not to think of ethical space as an it, but more as what we are co-creating and enacting together. So another really important piece of this ethical guidance work that we've been doing has been informed by a workshop that we held last February in 2019. And this workshop was held in Edmonton and brought together about 60 people for a couple of days to build common understandings of ethical space for knowledge co-production. In this case, it was community-based monitoring, but I would argue that really the work that we did, and the examples may have been coming from community-based monitoring, but apply, I think, across the board, including to participatory video. So we just wanted to share that, these people, elders, knowledge holders, ethics experts, scientists, community-based monitoring practitioners, and Indigenous partners came together and really worked hard to understand, what are the ethical issues that we're facing on the ground in our community-based monitoring, and what's the guidance that's offered by the existing Western scientific principles, ethical principles. And then we also take a look at what do the IWAP principles offer us in terms of a way to navigate through these issues. So we talked about all this, and all of that discussion and all the generosity of those who are involved. We identified what some of the real needs on the ground and the gaps are in ethical guidance, and that really informed us and inspired our work ever since. And just I think to say that the proceedings from that workshop, there's a very comprehensive report that we produced to share the learnings. And I think that link to that will be sent out afterwards, perhaps with the feedback survey for the webinar. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look. Okay, sorry. So I think that's what I wanted to say. Sorry, leading up to just touching on the guidance itself. And here's like a really big overview, really quick. But the guidance is comprised of 9 interrelated principles that we hope will support the co-creation of ethical space and help us with respectful knowledge exchanges, with the idea of we respect where one another comes from and uphold the integrity of each other's beliefs and values and knowledge systems. So it's really intended as some guidance to help build relationships and collaborations. One of the things about the principles that we did intentionally was we created them all as verbs, so they're all active. So just like I described, ethical space is not it, nor are the principles. So they're all very active and alive and meant to be that way. Like the IWAP principles, meant to be held in that indivisible whole and held together and interpreted together. And so we hope and we believe that this guidance that we're developing, it's still in progress, will take us beyond this idea of just limiting our ethical considerations to research involving humans, but we want to be more inclusive of the more than human world and intercultural, interspecies, and intergenerational aspects of how we are and what we know and how we should be together. So here's a glimpse of the 9 principles themselves. The wording still may change because we're doing some fine tuning, but we begin with that respect for the inherent dignity of humans and all beings and the interconnectedness of all of us. And as Ira opened, caring about well-being. Embracing humility, the limits of any of our knowledge systems or methods, and proceeding with precaution without arrogance, knowing that we might make mistakes and not being afraid to try and fail, but also being ready to take the responsibility for when something doesn't go right and to make it right with each other. So these are the kinds of things that are contained in the principles, and I've highlighted two in blue that I thought might be worth just touching into a little bit more related to participatory video. And one is about consenting. In our case, we call consenting meaningfully. Consent has a lot of history to it, and there's lots of ways that consent is implemented, and we're trying to encourage a certain way of considering consent. And the other one is Coprotecting Indigenous Knowledge, which was gifted actually from the IWAP panel members when we brought forward the idea of creating guidance for knowledge co-production. Elder Dr. Reg Croshew said, well, you can't have co-production without co-protection. Protection is essential for us to be able to work together across knowledge systems. So I'm just going to visit these two principles just very, very briefly. This idea of meaningfully consenting being a continuous process of choosing to participate, with the idea that at any stage, participants and partners should be able to say no, and we need to support that no and find another way. The idea that consent is really not I don't think should be a checkbox or a signature on a page, but is require multiple ways of receiving consent and nurturing that relationship of consent ongoing. And there may be multiple processes involved. For example, do I consent to being recorded for this webinar? Yeah, I consent, I do, I'm here and I'm really happy to do that. It might be a different story that if I said something that was troubling and I wish I hadn't have said it, I might not want to give consent to make the video public. And so, I mean, I do, and I hope I won't say anything, but just as an example, there may be stages to check in participatory video where on reflection, that shouldn't be in there or something else should. And I know the process itself speaks to that, but sometimes just really checking in intentionally about that with everyone, that they're feeling well. And then I think a really important thing in my mind when it comes to video is it's like a whole nother dimension with new forces at work when something becomes public, compared with if it's in the hands of the people, the communities, or the people who have created something. When the choice comes to make something public, there's a whole nother set of forces beyond our control at work. And I just wanted to touch on that. We can talk about it more if that's of interest and relevance. Obviously, there's both in individual and collective dimensions to consent. And very importantly, it's really not an externally imposed process. It really needs to come, consent really needs to come from Indigenous community protocols and processes themselves, and that's an integral part of consenting meaningfully. When new ideas or uses or applications come up, often a reconsenting process is really important rather than assuming it's all okay. So I just wanted to touch that on those little bits of consent, if those are of interest. I also want to touch on something maybe Ira might develop further, this idea of co-protecting Indigenous knowledge. And the idea is that we really can't be sharing and co-creating or co-producing anything together if there isn't protection mechanisms in place to protect the integrity of what it is that we're sharing. If we don't have a safe environment to share in, we really don't feel comfortable sharing, or that changes our sharing. What is it that we're talking about protecting Indigenous knowledge from? Often it's things like misinterpretation, misrepresentation, misappropriation, these kinds of things. And, it's really not easy. There's so much relational that's a part of this in the process. Co-protection is just not like a later part of the process. It's all the way through. Are we really checking in with one another about doing this in a good way, following protocols and what our community knowledge holders and elders and are expecting of us and teaching us. So one thing I did want to touch in that I mentioned already is that if a video from your work goes public, it kind of in my mind is a branch point of decision. And that's a time I think that sometimes these Western legal mechanisms might be of use to take a closer look at. And one of these is copyright, something that I've done in a lot of my work, not in participatory video, but in creating video archives and recordings of events like this, is ensuring that there's a custom copyright that protects the integrity of what is shared and the rights of those who are involved in creating it. So that might be something that could be of use to you in future in your considerations. And so I just want to end and pass off to Ira with the idea that really, to me, ethics ethics comes from ethos, which comes from the Greek word that it refers to our fundamental character and our way of living and being, and how we relate to one another and the natural world. And ethics to me is really not rules and codes of behavior so much as it is how we show up and how we treat one another. And we hope that I'm always very inspired by the principles here. They are on little rounds of wood, but treating each other with kindness and coming in good faith and sharing with respect and humility and honor, etc. So that's, I think, what is the essence of ethics, much more so than anything that we would codify. And I think I'll turn it over to Ira now. Thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that this sort of broad overview is helpful. And we're here to support your work in any way that we can on this webinar and beyond. So if anything I've said is of interest or confusing, I hope that you'll feel free to ask afterwards after Ira's presentation. So thank you so much, and I will stop screen sharing. And over to you, Ira.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. I want to thank you for the work that you've done with this information, putting it together. It's every time I hear it, it really sparks a lot of conversation and a lot of debate. Thank you for that. And I encourage everyone to please prepare some questions, because we're going to be addressing them right after we're done. Good morning, everyone. I just want to officially or properly introduce myself. My name is Ira Provost. I'm a member of the Piikani Nation. My Blackfoot name is Piikaniquen, which means a man from my nation, or the Piikani Nation. I am coming to you today from the Piikani Nation itself, the reserve. We're located, for those of you who don't know, I think you all do, but southern Alberta, southwestern Alberta. And like Kelly, I wish I had a screenshot of my environment today. For once, it's not blowing in Brockett. So I think that's a really surprising thing. It's always windy in Brockett. So much so the bandwidth here kind of rattles, but it's a very good day here in Brockett, and I welcome you from our nation. So who I am in my community, for those of you who don't know, is I'm the manager of my consultation department, and my work professionally is to work with proponents external to our community within our territory. And so for our community, how it works is we have a lands department who looks after land concerns within our community. And then we have a consultation department which looks after concerns of concern to the nation beyond our federal reserve borders. And so with that, what I do is, on behalf of our chief and council, I develop relationship paths to understanding who our proponents are, and how we can develop relationships for the duration of working with any entity beyond our borders. So it takes time, and I work with government, and I also work with industry and academic institutions as well. I want to also begin by saying I absolutely take the same approach and understanding as Kelly does. And I want to acknowledge the work that we've done up to now, presenting in other places and having these discussions with broader communities, really across the country. And what I'm really hopeful and encouraged by is the approach that she's taken to say that when we talk about ethics, it's absolutely not about a rule. It's not about a hard, fast rule. It's not about what you can and can't do. An interpretation of that could be limitations, but certainly it's not meant to be prohibitive. With my understanding of ethics, it's certainly about doing the right thing. Understanding who you're working with, understanding your community, and developing strategies and understandings that fit best your community. For Piikani, and I'll start there. The Piikani Nation, we're a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and we are like many other nations within Canada. Of course, we are very much a nation who has many similar concerns to the other nations across the province. And one of our concerns is that we have a traditional way of life, and it's something that we don't take lightly. We have a very strong protocol around our cultural interaction. I don't want to summarize the idea or the entire world and breadth of knowledge that's incorporated in the term culture. I have culture, but what we have a very multifaceted environment within that culture, as do many other nations. Of course, the nations that we're working with regards to this project, the Blood Tribe, and Dinétah and Samson. We, of course, have our various ceremonial and cultural way of life, and these are something that we really need to be protected. So I understand and I know what's involved with the Fire with Fire project, obviously, because we are one of the project partners, and the main part of the main part of the meeting, or sorry, the main part of the project is to understand how to work with a community with your video project. Now, I understand that most of you are probably at various stages of collecting your data. Some of you may have already conducted your videos. Some may just be starting. With Piikani Nation. We're probably about halfway through the interviews right now. And so by saying some of the information that I'm going to talk about, it is by no means perfect, and I'm not saying here that Piikani Nation has this all figured out, because believe me, we don't. What I am saying is that the things that we need to consider when conducting any research within our community is to understand what the community needs. What are your community's wants and desires? And this is reflecting a lot back on what Kelly has said in her slides. it's really important to know that for us and for the Beginning Nation, there isn't one person who should um, take the opinion that this is what should be researched. It needs to be a collective. It needs to be a general understanding of where this needs to go. And the great thing about the Fire Project when we started with our introductory workshop, we got some of those perspectives, we got some of those concerns, and we got some of that guidance in the beginning. Being on the ground, I'm going to talk a little bit about Piikani and who they are and what their needs were when we approached them for our Fire with Fire project. So last workshop, we heard about the Australians in the Australian example and how they use fire. Now, for the Beginning Nation, it's different because even though we are a part of a forest system, which is in the mountains, the primary landscape for us are the foothills, which do have a great deal of forested area, but we also are part of the Plains people, so we have a vast ecosystem within our territory. So it's a matter of understanding that and what does that mean for our people. Primarily, we go to the elders and we ask them first, and we ask them what is their understanding of the environment, what is their understanding of concerns for the environment and how that might change. What is the role of fire in that equation? And they'll tell us. To this point, that's what they have been telling us, and they've been giving us that explanation of what that means. The one thing that I wanted to point out when we've gone through this surveying the community and taking that information in, it was really important for us, and this may have happened with some of your projects already, but the idea right away was for us to meet with the elders beforehand and let them determine where the data would go. And this isn't a one-time, I'm going to go meet with the elders, I'm going to meet with this elder or that elder this one time. It's a matter of coming back time after time. At one of our meetings, we actually had a simple meal with the elders, and there wasn't anything that was discussed in a great detail about what we needed from them. It was a matter of visiting. It was a matter of getting that trust with the communities and those particular people, so then we can have more of an open dialogue as to what we need. And it was really clear right away in some cases, and this is the one point that I really want to hit home on when we're talking about the work that we're doing, is the idea of co-protecting Indigenous knowledge, as Kelly mentioned. I'm of the opinion that we need to create some accountability with the community, with the research that we do. Like it was mentioned, I've done some graduate work, and the graduate work I did, I struggled with it because what I found was when I did the work for my degree, I had to really come to a quick understanding of who I was doing the research for. Right away, it was when you enter into a post-secondary institution, you need to follow the rules of the institution, and of course, their ethical guidelines. And those don't necessarily follow the same guidelines as your community. But what I did find out in my research was I came across a concept called relational accountability. And one of the authors of that is a Indigenous researcher by the name of Sean Wilson. And you can see how much I use his work. My copy of his book is all beat up. It's spent a lot of reading hours going through the book. But what he talks about is how everything that you do, you must be accountable to the community. Everything that you do must be guided by the community. And it just makes sense. So when I approached the degree that I achieved, it was really about, I blatantly told my supervisors that even though I'm fulfilling some requirements for this degree, I'm more so accountable to my community, and I gotta leave this work thinking that I have not harmed my community in any way. And that's what the idea of relational accountability is. If I'm doing something, is it going to be accepted by my peers in my community or not? Or is it going to be rejected? And there's a very thin line between if that happens or not. When I was doing some of the research for our project in our community, there's a number of, you'll find there are a number of research projects constantly going in Indigenous communities. Currently, I know working in the Begunning Nation, I can count a number of them going on right now. And they all come in with varying degrees of accountability. Some have went through ethics and some have not. And I presented this problem to a coworker, and we talked about it, and we said, is this the right thing to do? We have to understand that within our communities there is good research, but there's also not good research, even done by our own community. We have to understand how those understandings have come forward and have not. So in working through and trying to figure out our project within Fire and Fire, we found out that there's a number of projects in our community that have not done a great deal of rigor in defining their own ethics guidelines to do their research. So what we did was we made recommendations to them and to give them understandings and provide some support should they need them. So the accountability that we need to show within our work is very much dependent upon what the community says. So it's important to check in with the community often. The last point that Kelly Rose in her slides was talking about, doing that recheck-in. There was an instance within our community where we were working with a post-secondary institution, and there had been about 2 or 3 years worth of work done with this institution and on a number of elders within our community. Now, at the very end of that time, for whatever reason that I've yet to fully understand, a researcher from the university came in to work with one of the elders, and at the end, the elder had a change of heart and said that I do not consent to allowing my voice heard in this research. And the researcher came to me and was rightfully upset and said, What should we do? What could we do? And at that time, what I told him was that unfortunately, this research can't move forward. It's over. At least this part of that research can't be published. It can't continue on. So there are risks in not doing something right. I, as a researcher in my own community, really look at the research that we do have in our community. And like I said, there is good research and there's not good research. We run our community archives here in Beginning Nation. We're fortunate to have an archiving system. But what we've found is over the years, there hasn't been proper protocol put around the actual labeling and the interpretation of a lot of historical documents. I recall one of my student researchers coming forward with this tape that she found that had an old recording of actually my grandparent, and I can tell I love the fact that my own family was being kept in this way, and their stories can carry on. Unfortunately, the problem with that was that there was no date put on the information. There was no markings to say when the event took place. There's a little bit of indication in the recording, but not so much in the in a lot more detail. So it's really important that, you know, as we go forwards, a lot of the information that you're going to collect within your research project, labeling is a very important part that I know, of course, a lot of you won't miss, but it's something that can be overlooked in everything that you have. I just want to conclude here to say that with ethics and the work that we do, I don't think that there will ever be a definitive definition of what ethics should be, especially with Indigenous communities, Indigenous knowledge, for the reason that that needs to be defined individually with each community. What works for Samson may not work for Piikani or the Blood Tribe or Dinétah. But if my researchers from Piikani Nation are going to Dinétah and doing research there, we need to understand what that community's needs are and not think that we're going to apply our own values and our own understandings of what good research is here for there. That seems to be common knowledge, that seems to be courtesy, but many times that's overlooked, especially when we talk about outside researchers coming in to do the work, do work in community. Beginning Nation, just to give a somewhat of an epilogue here, what we are embarking on is to develop an ethics branch within our community ourselves, so that we have a broader understanding of what's coming into the community and what's not. And I think it's really fortunate that some communities are able to do that, understanding that not all communities are able to do that as well. But it's really important to know that communities do have these protocols, and a lot of them center around cultural ability and cultural understandings and awareness, so that they can look back on have their own guiding principles. But for the time being, I am going to leave it there. But what I do want to do at this point is I want to turn it to the audience if you have any questions or any any concerns about some of the work that we're doing and so on. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much to Kelly and Ira. Those were both fantastic presentations, and I think was a really good grounding in ethics for us. So like Ira said, we would love to open it up to the audience to ask questions. In case you missed it at the beginning, you are free to ask your question in the chat box, and then I can read it out to our presenters. However, if you would like to go on video and ask them directly, you can just raise your hand, and then we will release your audio and video, and you can ask the question directly.
Marley and Ira, I wonder if to start us off and warm things up, we have one of our colleagues who's been working with us on the advisory and stewardship circle on our ethical guidelines, and that's Karen Smith-Fargy. And I wondered if she might just have a little bit of a reflection and or start us off with a pondering in our discussion.
Yeah, good morning, thank you. And I see in the Q&A, Tamara has a question, so I won't be long because I'm really interested to know what's top of mind for her. Thank you, Ira and Kelly. I'm a learner in this work, and you are my elders, and so just great thanks for the sharing. Every time I hear and sitting dialogue with you, I learn great. So I have a lot of wonderings myself as I learn in this. But what I heard today and what really resonated with me today is this definition of how when you say the word ethos, which is, you know, for many of us and myself included, a new word, and I'm thinking, oh, ethos, huh? And you connected that to a way of living, a way of being. And I think if we unpack this complicated word of ethics, it really is that. It's not a set of rules, it's how we show up and how we hold each other and treat each other with care. Now, I'm conscious that I'm coming, I would say, although perhaps I don't strongly identify, but my background is a Western worldview. And so how I view sitting together with care is absolutely probably different than other culture, than if I was sitting, you know, in dialogue with somebody from another culture. So what's resonating and what I heard today is what we're really seeking is to sit in an ethical space where we're caring for each other, acknowledging diversity, and so that in fact is beyond the way of being, but ways of engaging with each other, ways of knowing, ways of acknowledging what is equitable in that space, and indeed ways of building relationships. And so one of the things that I'm really curious about, and one of the lead elders in this work that we've done and been learning together in the stewarding of this work, and Elder Elmer Ghostkeeper, he always brings in this concept of language. And so my question, my wondering perhaps to Ira and Kelly, is when we think about co-protecting knowledge, and we think about, and Ira, you mentioned some mechanisms, some very concrete mechanisms for that co-protection. How does language, how does language fit into that? So yeah, in connection with protecting knowledge. But I'm Marley, you know, it's an indulgence for me to pose this wondering. I pose it out to the audience, knowing that there are many Indigenous speakers out there. So when maybe it's a wondering for them too, and they can enter into this dialogue. But, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So by the same breath, I open that up to anyone who would like to share their insight to that question. So with regards to language, absolutely, language has so much breadth and depth to it. And many Indigenous language speakers will tell you that, and it's certainly true in Blackfoot, that Blackfoot has such a, is very, and my elders would tell you this, is very verb. There's a lot of verbs in there, and there's very rarely nouns. So when we say things like a greeting, hello, my name is, I say, Oki Nixukua, Nistuagok, meaning all that I am, all that you know or you will see is this person here. So it's giving me, it's opening you up to who I am. It's not just saying, I'm just this one individual there. So there's a lot more understanding that comes within the language. So the language for me is really key to helping those concepts resonate with the community. With language too, you can also look at it as it's a way to communicate. You know, simply put, if you were to speak with elders in their language or allow them to respond or to tell their stories in their language, I think that would be the first choice that you should make when collecting your data from the community, because nothing is going to get lost in the language, because again, the language is so complex, and one little phrase can be a couple pages long in English. So those concepts are really key. So I would say, with regards to ethics, encourage the community users, the community people to use language, encourage language. Because in the past, I've seen that language has been suppressed. So this, the idea of language can help the community members open up. But again, you know, as you do that, the researcher needs to understand that that exchange is so much more richer and needs more care. So as you receive that information, know that there's this great depth to this information that you're receiving, and it's saying a ton. You may not realize it's saying a ton, but it is. So just be very respectful of that exchange, especially when it comes to language.
Okay, thank you. Marley, maybe I can invite Tamara to pose her question. I see that in the Q&A. Thank you, Ira.
I don't know if we have Tamara anymore. I think she might be.
Hello.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Somehow bumped me off, but well, I just want to thank you so much for this discussion on PV, and especially in framing it around ethics. I've been working with participatory video and photography, both researching the practice for the last 10 years and practicing, mostly in developing countries on climate change. But I was also honored to work with the Chippewa Prairie Dene First Nation in Janvier, Alberta, near Fort McMurray, after the wildfire disaster. And I agree that ethics is actually tied in with trust as a necessary foundation in working with any community, especially because participatory video is often used with communities whose voices are not being heard and need to be heard. And so I think that in my research with PV and just studying the practice, ethics doesn't always get the attention that it needs. And I find this really concerning because PV as a practice, as a historical practice, is rooted in not only understanding injustices by people who are telling their stories, but actually using the practice as a way to shift those injustices that are keeping people's voices from being heard and their concerns from being acted on. And so I guess this is where I have a question. what I found a lot in PV is that there's a lot of attention on people whose voices aren't heard being represented, and that PV gives an opportunity for voices to be represented. However, I think there's not as much attention or resources or time allocated to making sure that those voices are actually responded to. So people come into communities, they gather the information, but then there's not actually always a return to showing that, or in considering how sharing those views might actually put people at greater harm, you know, especially young people or a lot of people, because they are speaking truth to power. So how do you give advice for bringing that response into projects, you know, and especially research projects that are often about the gathering of voices rather than that fuller picture of changing systems of oppression? So thank you.
Tamara, thank you so much. Really appreciate your question. And I don't work in participatory video myself directly. I have video recording and editing experience, but it's not my methodology. And as I look into different projects and writings, I came to that conclusion, oh, it doesn't seem like there's really, it's almost like the ethics are assumed to all be intact and good in participatory video as a methodology because the intentions are so good. And as you said, that, you know, I think that this is a blind spot, a potential blind spot in the process that I think really needs to be brought forward and discussed more explicitly. As you say, one of the things that that I believe in our work together in developing ethical guidance is that there's a full circle, and it doesn't actually, it's not even just one circle. It's a spiral of learning, and the process is not linear. It's circular and continues, and we have to be able to do our best to think through what the potential, not just the potential benefits, but the potential risks and harms and burdens. And we don't want to focus on the negative all the time, but we do have to really think those through. And particularly, you gave a brilliant example of speaking truth to power and being in a vulnerable position. And I have something to relate to that, directly in that way, not through participatory video with Indigenous communities, but I have a climate activist teenage daughter who is on the front lines putting herself out there with her views. She gets a lot of support from wonderful adults who really, you know, get behind her. She's very informed and very articulate. But there's also a lot of maybe uninformed and very hateful people who feel very free to express themselves. And Greta Thunberg as well. I mean, she's had death threats. So, you know, in other contexts, I can relate to that potential harm or those unknowns that people might be entering. And that's why, I mean, when I was just touching on both consenting and co-protecting knowledge, once these voices, which are very important for us to hear and know about, get more wider circulation, which can happen so easily in digital form and across the internet, we really don't have control anymore. We give up control, and we give up a lot of our rights because we can't enforce them in how what we share will be used by others in good ways and in not so good ways, and also distorted or, you know, used in harmful ways. And it's very actually hurtful to think about that, but I think it's a difficult but necessary part of the work and the responsibility for lifting up voices and allowing them to be heard, is to really stay with that work through those phases of being shared out there, in whether it's in public or in decision-making circles or in the political realm or wherever that those harms might come from. And we need to really stay with that work. The project's not over when the video is made. It's a relationship that continues. And that's the kind of, I think, accountability and responsibility that I think Ira is also touching on when he talks about relational accountability. But Ira, let me pass it over to you because you probably have some things to say. Thank you, Tamara, for this question. I think it's really important.
Hi, thanks, Kelly, and thanks to Mary. Yeah, a really important question, and I honor you for the work that you're doing. Certainly, it's a very good cause to study, and it sounds like you're studying it. So great. The one thing that's really important to know when doing that work, and I know you talked about other places internationally that you've been. What I find, and I could be wrong, or I don't mean to make blanket statements that are concrete or absolute, because that's certainly not the case. Every Indigenous community is different. So having said that, for me, this idea of co-creating, co-protecting, equally working with a research body, co-creating is not the norm for an Indigenous community. We don't expect to be heard. And that's one of the challenges that people don't quite understand yet. Because when I approach my community, everyone in Picani knows pretty much who Ira is, knows that I do research, and know that I'm interviewing often. But still at times, I still face that question and that scrutiny, as I should. What is your research about? What is it doing? Where is it going? Where is it going to end up? My communities and most Indigenous communities are not research savvy. So we have to come in with that understanding that the idea of this co-creation, even though I understand it, I absolutely agree with it and am taking an active part in it. Most of my community is not or are not willing to even begin to have those conversations. So that's where a lot of this sensitivity really needs to be taken beforehand. So just even that step, that I would have that to offer the conversation, that it's really that beginning step. Some people in Indigenous communities may not even, I mispronounced her name, Twyla Smith, or Twyla Smith from New Zealand, says research is a swear word, is a 4-letter word to Indigenous communities, and it still is. So that's something that we have to be very worried about, that when we're talking about ethics, those have to guide the steps that we take. So I'll leave it there and hope that helps.
Thank you both so much.
We had Kyra Northwest wanting to provide her perspective. Kyra, are you still on the call?
Yeah, I am.
Perfect.
Sorry, this is the first time doing like a Zoom. I'm completely new to it and had no idea how it worked. I'm so used to the Zoom calls, but not the webinar portion. And like, I couldn't see who the participants were when I was in the webinar. So I was like, oh, now I can feel part of it.
It's a bit of an adjustment. I've been using it for a little while now, and I'm still adjusting.
It is, and I haven't been able to join much to the webinars just because of my schedule for work and everything. But yeah, I'm so glad I was able to join, and I really enjoyed the presentation. So thank you, Kelly and Ira. And I think it really does feed into the work that we're doing with the communities and kind of some things to think about moving forward. for like, I really too agree with Ira and the comments around the importance of language and the significance of language and the work that we do, and especially when we're talking about ethics, because within our community and in Musqueam, we're Cree language speakers, and that's some of the things of the work that we do is kind of understanding that relationship between the work that we're doing, the incorporation of the language, and how that's kind of how that kind of ties into the work that we do, and ensuring that one, we're promoting the language, and then also two, one of the big things for us, I'm a very, very junior Cree speaker. Like, I'm still learning. I am definitely not fluent. I understand bits and pieces of the language, and I've been taking classes and all these different things, and working a lot with elders to understand, I guess, the interconnectedness between our language, and then how it ties into so many different things. And one big thing that I've been kind of being educated about and learning is how our language contains these concepts of ethics and concepts of laws, and how words can mean so many different things. One word could be, for an example, is wakotuin, and that Cree word, the literal translation means kinship. But beyond that, and when you dive deeper into it, it means interconnectedness of everything, interconnectedness that we have with nature, the relationships that we have as communities, and the relationships that we have with natural systems, and that could even include our relationship with fire. But in these findings and things that we've been talking about is that a lot of these words have either laws or codes of conduct that are tied to these words. And so it really gives us an idea of how we interact with those things, or with each other, or those elements. And so I think with the understanding of language, when you get to those basic root words and understanding of what these words mean, and kind of expanding on that, you really do get the deeper understanding of the relationship that Indigenous people or Cree people have with those words or those things. An interesting thing that I've seen around the word fire was that the word fire is iskotel in Cree, and there's connections to the word iskotel to the word woman, which is iskwel. So there's that isk part of the word that ties in between fire and women. And there's stories behind that, and it talks about what was a woman's relationship to fire, and going beyond that. So, and it kind of talks too about origins of words, kind of how some of them have a very sacred origin. Some of them have the origins of the words talk about these rules or these codes of conduct about what we do. And then a lot of them also come about from observations that we have with our relationship with the natural environment. So kind of having knowledge about the background of these words and really digging deeper into the significance of language, it ties into kind of the knowledge as our like sources of knowledge, and kind of like how we deliberate about our actions around these things. If it's something that we talk about, because to be honest, a lot of our laws and the things that we talk about in our ethics as Cree people, they live through stories, through songs, through ceremonies, all of these different things. So yeah, I completely agree with Ira that including language and the understanding of language, and discussing these things as in terms of I guess understanding, it really is an important piece we need to be thinking about. And like I'm still learning about these things, and I always just find it so amazing when I find out deeper meanings of Cree words and terminology. It really makes your heart happy, and it also makes you really think about your relationships to people, your relationships to the environment, and to even the spiritual aspects of our culture. So I really enjoyed that Ira spoke about these things from their perspective and from their language. So thank you, Ira, and thank you, Kelly, also.
Thank you, Kyra, for sharing that with us. Neil, I am going to promote you to a panelist so that you can ask your question and join us on video.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, sounds good.
Great. So thank you, Ira. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you to the organizers. These webinars and this series has just been fantastic. Really enjoying all of the webinar series. My question relates to a comment that was made earlier about kind of the intent of the Fire with Fire project, and it's this kind of merging of knowledge from communities and then maybe the Western science and our understanding of changing fire regimes and climate. And as I listened to the information from today's webinar, it kind of struck me that there's, you know, I don't know if I'm using the right words, but around First Nations language and knowledge sharing, there's, you know, it's careful, there's sensitivities. And, you know, I'm reflecting on some recent experiences in the science community whereby, you know, researchers put forward their ideas and they're reviewed through a peer review process. And I don't see the same kind of ethics there, whereby, you know, reviewers will spend a lot of time providing feedback, but sometimes the scientists are very forceful with their ideas. They're disrespectful to the comments of their reviewers. And so I guess what I'm coming around to saying is that there's this kind of careful approach with how knowledge is shared and used within First Nations communities. I don't know that we have the same thing in Western science. And so I'm interested in terms of how we bring these two things together, where in my opinion, Western science is much more of a, you know, I don't want to use a forceful approach, but there's no sensitivities or carefulness in terms of how we share that information. It's just, it's out there. And so, you know, just being mindful that my question isn't really clear, I'm going to leave it there. And, you know, how do the presenters respond to that?
Sure, I'll go first, and then I'll let Kelly speak. So, really good question. So we've been hearing a lot about maybe just in the circles that I run with, but maybe not so much in the actual scientific community. But we talk about bringing science and Indigenous knowledge together. Some people use the word braiding. Some people use the word what have you. And the idea is hopeful. And I'm striving for that equality one day. But for myself, just in my own personal view of Indigenous knowledge and science, they're apples and oranges. They can complement each other. But when we talk about Indigenous knowledge with regards to science and the application of it towards the natural sciences, the ideas of both are so complex that I don't think that there really is an equal comparison. In my point of view, Indigenous knowledge far exceeds simple science, because there is no degree of error in science, whereas Indigenous knowledge, it's a breadth of understanding that is involved in its findings. Having said that, and again, I know your question was somewhat open, because the answer to that question is not easy as well. There's a lot of science out there that still does not agree in application, in actual on-the-ground activity that believes Indigenous knowledge is equal. There's a lot of scientific approaches and processes out there that that would rather not engage with Indigenous knowledge. So there's that side of the coin, and it really, in a lot of the work that we do on the nation, it's a lot of us validating, providing evidence that our traditional knowledge is worth that validation, when it should actually be the other way around. Again, that's my own personal view. But it really, to me, and I don't mean to sound like I'm settling here, but it's kind of the era that we're in, where we are in an era of, they say, reconciliation, an era of reconciling the knowledge and the knowledge gap that exists. So I don't think there's an answer. If you're working with an individual nation, it's very good to work directly one-on-one with that nation, with those knowledge holders, to understand how you can bridge the two, and how you can, if you have a specific project, you can, and what you should do is bring the scientists and the knowledge keepers together for that project, so you have a greater understanding of both. And again, that's not a one-time thing. I would ask and encourage you to do it over a period of time to create a relationship. But yeah, it's not an easy answer, but I know we're running out of time, so I'll leave it there.
Maybe I'll just, thank you so much for the question, Neil and Ira, for your response. And I won't take long because we are running out of time, Neil, but I think that observation that you brought forward is really, part of the incentive that we have to come forward with new articulations and of ethical guidance that can help us, especially those of us raised in the Western scientific traditions and philosophies, help us get out of that individualistic mindset, the self-interested, rational, individual, unbiased, objective scientist, where the ethics are about the individual and kind of feeding into a system that's quite linear and quite extractive and quite self-interested, with often economic or sort of power hierarchy oriented ambitions. And that's one system and one way of doing things, but it's very from the head. And I think what we're really doing with in our work with ethical guidance is we're not creating a tool, or we're not creating a prescription. We're trying to raise awareness and invite people to build our own capacities to grow and develop, and to be able to be present across differences in different ways and be open to new ways of doing things. So so, and then there's as Kyra, thank you so much, Kyra. Ethics. I just received John Burroughs' new book, Laws, Indigenous Ethics, and how ethics and teachings embedded in language and laws and coming forward in the words and in the language. And English is not like that. Elmer speaks about this a lot. He says, English came from England. That's not the language of this land. And our words are such and such. As Kyra was sharing, they have these other meanings resonant with this ecology. So, part of our work and our hope is to help open up minds and hearts and spirits to other ways of knowing and being and doing, and invite people into how can we go forward in better ways, in good ways together. So I'll leave it there just because there's short of time, but love the question and love this opportunity to be in conversation.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to open it up to one more question because it is 11:30. So just one more before we close.
Hello, hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this presentation. I know we're really short on time, and so I'll just get right to it. I do a lot of work with Indigenous youth in different communities and through participatory video. And actually my colleague Maeva Gauthier is here as well. We have a project right now in Tuktoyaktuk where we're working with the youth. We've worked with the youth to create a film about climate change and what it means to the youth. One of the questions I have is, with all you folks in the room, do you have any suggestions or guidelines specifically when working with youth and people under 18 sometimes when it comes to ethical considerations? So I am very curious about what can we do to up our game and be better prepared and continue the conversation when we're dealing with minors.
Ara, do you have anything that you want to speak to with that comment?
Go ahead, I'll go right after you really quick.
Well, Gerald, thanks for your question, and hello, Maeva, as well. We had a chance to chat yesterday, and I, really appreciate the work that you're doing with the Inuit youth, and amazing. I actually have my own questions about the involving minors or youth and some of the extra considerations. From the Western research ethics perspective, youth are a vulnerable category, and there's permissions required from guardians or parents to allow them to participate often, and consenting processes can have another layer to them. And so those are sort of required through research ethics, and depending on the institutions you're working through, you'll run into those. But I think I hear in your question is how can we up our game, and perhaps I'm just assuming rather than just follow the research ethics requirement of my university or the institution, how can we perhaps rise to another understanding of ethics as ethos? And I love that idea. I really think that's part of our solution here, is to, as we work with youth and new generations, to get out of that mindset of siloing ethics off to the side of some kind of checklist process or some bureaucratic process I have to jump through the hoops with my institution in order to get to do what I want to do. But how can ethics ethos, understanding the laws of the land and the protocols of the peoples we're working with, how can that shine through and become a part of our conception of what we're doing and how we do things together, the designs of our projects and the way that we work together, and then how we stay in relationship and afterwards. So I leave it there, but I really encourage and appreciate and honor your question and what you've raised as an opportunity. I really think that's something we need to be considering and supporting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just really quick, I did a ton of work with youth for the last, I would say, decade and a half. I worked for Lethbridge School District as a liaison, and I was doing Indigenous programming with them for many years. The one thing that really stands out for me that I left, I'm hoping, a lasting impression with them was the idea of legacy. How do you leave a legacy? What would you like to see? And the really hard thing for me to get, and I think any of us as parents, how do we get our children to appreciate that we're going to value the time now, 10 years from now? And so what I've done in my former career was to really try to instill an experience that they can build upon and reflect back on and connect with. Now, I'm not understanding your project at all and what it is my only strongest advice to youth is to try to instill in them the idea of legacy, the idea of leaving something behind and caring for their children 10 years, 20 years down the road. So I'll leave it there. Good luck to your project.
Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, well, we're a little past 11:30, so I'm going to have to wrap it up, but I want to give a huge thank you to Kelly and Ira for joining us today and presenting and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your experience with us. And Ira, thank you so much for starting us off in a good way today with the prayer. I really appreciate that. And I also really want to thank everyone that joined us today, not only for joining, but for participating. I think we had some amazing questions and dialogue and discussion. I know I learned a lot, and I have a lot of things sort of going on in my brain that I'm going to take back to my project with participatory video. So on behalf of the Fire with Fire team, thank you all for joining us. There will be a feedback survey sent out shortly after, so please fill that out if you get a chance. We're also going to share a little bit of extra information regarding the ethical guidance work that Kelly and Ira have touched on, so feel free to take a look through that and reach out to us if you have any questions. And keep your eyes on your inboxes for future webinar invites. So thank you so much, and with that, have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Marley, Eli, and Ira.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.